Alright, so the next checklist is the cleared to start checklist, which we are going to run now. So on the overhead panel, checking the APU is on and available. And we'll make sure the APU generator is set to auto and the bleed air is actually coming through. So we can do this by checking down on the ICAS display. So we'll come down here and open our ECS page. We can then see the APU is supplying bleed air to both packs and everything is looking good. You can see now the temperature has equalized here in the cockpit with our selected temperature as the packs have been running for a little while now. We would then check we've got all of our papers on board. Obviously not applicable to us here in a simulator environment. And then we'll next check the takeoff data. So to do that, we need to basically set our V-speeds. And you can do this in a couple of ways. You can use this knob here. And you would basically just set this to refs here. Press down the button and you can then scroll through and set the number as you wish, pressing the select button to change between each different speed. You can also set your V target speed with this selection here, so just twist this to the left and you'll see it changes to VT. You can change that here as well. However, that is fiddly and long process. We can do that very simply here in the Aerosoft CRJ by heading over to the EFB, going back to our performance tab and then checking our takeoff speed section here. So we're going to do a flaps 8 takeoff on a dry runway and then all we need to do is just hit set all. If we go back here, you can see now the speeds are all set as expected. We'll just hide that by clicking this down. We don't need that there as we're not changing them manually with this knob. But you can see the VT speed is set to 185, V2 136, V rotate 125 and V1 is 124. And V2 plus 10 is set using the selected speed at 146 in magenta. You can double check these by having a look here. So we've got 146, 185, 136, 125 and 124. So everything matches up, everything is looking good and those are the V speeds all set. These will always show on the PFD when the weight is on wheels and you have not yet started the engines. Okay, so next up, we'll just double check that all doors are actually closed. We closed them all earlier using the EFB, but we can check that from in the cockpit here using the doors page here. You can see all doors are green and closed. Just to show you what it would look like if something was open. If we open the forward cargo, you can see that's now yellow, indicating it's open. So we'll close that and we'll move on to the next item. So next up, we want to turn the beacon light now to on, indicating to ground crew. We're getting ready to start our engines and the aircraft is going to start moving. The fuel boost pumps, we already turned those on. Just double check they are actually still on. And we'll make sure the hydraulic pumps are all set to auto. And we'll next check the parking brake is still in fact on. Double checking with the ICAS display here. Parking brake is indeed on. Okay, so we're going to start the engines here at stand for the tutorial. Again, just to keep things nice and simple for you following along for the first time. Normally you would do this whilst you're being pushed back. However, like I say, just to keep the workload down and keep things simple, we're going to do it here on stand. One thing checking the parking brake has just reminded me is that the chocks, I believe, are still in place. So we want to make sure we remove those before we get going. And we'll also just make sure that we have stopped the fuel from being loaded onto the aircraft on this panel right here. So we'll turn this off and we'll guard the power switch. And that is all good to go. So obviously that's not included as a checklist item, so do make sure you remember that one, as it is something we just introduced in this video series. Okay, so we are now good to go ahead and start the engines. Alright, so let's first of all start with the right engine. So on the overhead panel, we'll just hit the start-stop button here. That will start the ignition sequence. We can come down here to the ICAS display. Let's finally just close those off. I'm sure that's been annoying many of you for the whole series so far. And yeah, we're just going to look for the N2 indications here as that starts to rise. Just make note of the fuel flow and oil temperature and pressure here as well. Once this reaches above 20%, we can then introduce fuel flow. And we are going to do that by going over to the throttle quadrant and just moving this lever to the idle position. You can then hear the engine start to spool up. Fuel flow increases. N2 starts to further rise. Oil pressure and temperature still rising. The ITT is rising, and the N1 is also slowly rising. Okay, so this engine is now a good start, and looks like it's stabilizing. Around 20%. N1 seems to be about good for idle on these engines. And just before we start the second engine, what we're going to do is just do a quick fuel feed check valve test. This is something you would only do on the first flight of the day. And we could do that by going to the overhead panel. We'll turn off both of the boost pumps here. Go back to the ICAS display. And we just want to see that we see left fuel low pressure indicated here. So that is all good. And we can now go back up to the top and start the boost pumps again. So we'll now start the left engine again in the same way. Hit the starter on the left side. We'll monitor the rise of N2 here. So this is now rising. Everything else looks as normal. And we can now set this lever to idle. Everything else should now rise as the right engine did. Okay then. Great stuff. So we now should see all of the cautions disappear here from the ICAS display. And this engine is stabilizing and everything is looking good. Okay, great stuff. Let's do our after start checklist. Obviously we can bring this up here as well. So we'll first check our generators overhead. Gen 1 and 2 is set to auto. That is looking good. We can also check this on the ICAS, so select the electric page here. And just see that Gen 1 and Gen 2 is in fact supplying electrical power now. You can see electric current is passing through them. The voltage and hertz have come alive. And you can see the flow of electricity with the green bars here. We'll just make sure the bleed valves are still set to auto. Everything up here is as we should expect it to be. Make sure the packs are still set to auto and everything is looking good there. We'll check the flow of the bleed air and the air conditioning once we've shut down the APU momentarily. So with anti-ice, in the manual it does say that the temperature is 18 degrees and anti-ice can stay off. Now, you may remember looking at the weather information at the beginning of the manual that it said to set the temperature to -2 degrees. Now, if we come down here, we can actually see it's -3 outside. So there is appear to be a little bit of a conflict between the two here. Obviously, we used the preset and we used the weather information at the start of the tutorial. So we are actually going to set the anti-ice to on here. So we'll set the cowl anti-ice, wing anti-ice to on, and you can hear the ambient sound in the cockpit goes up as the anti-ice comes to life. We can also now turn the probes on for the pitot tubes. We'll also double check the electrical power panel, which we already have done. We'll also just double check the rudder trim. Make sure the rudder trim is set to 0, which you can see here on the status page. It is indicated green and at center position. Next item on the checklist is to arm the nose wheel steering. However, as we haven't pushed back yet, we are not going to do that just yet. We'll get pushback now, so we shall call the tug. And just as he connects here, we shall release the parking brake. Wait for him to connect. There we go, and we'll release the parking brake and we shall get underway. We can now turn off the APU. So we'll hit the start-stop button first of all. Wait for this to spool down to 0%. And now we can go ahead and turn it off completely. You can see the APU door is now closed. Okay. So we don't want to push back too far here. We'll just push back to just behind this yellow line. I think we'll do it. And I think somewhere around there I'll do it. The fuel tanker there has parked in a rather unfortunate position, making it rather dangerous for us to actually push back here, but we're going to just ignore that. Okay, so let's set the parking brake. And now we can actually go ahead and set the nose wheel steering to armed. And we'll just do a quick check of the bleed air system. So we'll bring up the ECS page. And we can now see the bleed air has been transferred and it's passing from the engines through the valves here for the engines up into the packs on either side. You can see the APU is now off and the valve is now closed and everything is looking good. Okay then, so now we have done that, we've run our after start checklist items and we are ready for the taxi. So what I'm going to do is I am actually just going to leave it here for this video. We're going to continue on with the taxi in the next one. Again, you can access the playlist in the description down below, or by hitting the I in the top right of the screen. It should pop up round about now. And I want to thank you guys for watching. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Let me know what you think by hitting the thumbs up or down button. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to see more CRJ content. So, once again, thank you very much for watching. I will see you guys in the next video. And bye-bye for now.